What time is it? Watercolor real time. I'm Sandy Allnock, and I'll be painting this clock that you see over my shoulder. In this video, you're going to see it from just after the sketch was made, because I didn't film the sketch, all the way through to the signature at the end. You won't miss anything except for a few places where I cut the film, because who needs to watch paint dry? So that's the only parts you'll miss. In the video, you'll also hear me talking throughout the whole thing. I am an instructor by trade, so I will tell you everything I'm doing and why. I also will have some things on the screen for stuff that I forgot to say, like which brush I'm using at the time. There will be tips for beginner, intermediate, and advanced, as I try to do in all my YouTube videos, because I never know who's going to watch it. And I know anytime I watch an art video, I'd like to have something at my level, even if some of the other things are things I already knew. So I like to include all of that. Just know that if you're a beginner, there might be things in here that you're like, whoa, what did she just do? What happened there? Leave me a comment and I'll explain it if I can. And it could turn into a new video that I make in the future as well. If you'd like to skip just to the painting and eliminate this discussion here of the subject matter and how to choose it, then you can fast forward to the timestamp on the screen and just watch the painting, but the rest of us will sit here and have a chat first. I want to talk about the subject matter because this was not in my sketchbook. There was a sketchbook flip through that was the first video on this channel, and I asked you to tell me which subjects you might like to see for videos on this channel in the future. And oh my goodness, did you come through with flying colors? I was so excited to read everything that you had to say, and I have sticky notes all over that sketchbook so I can start to plan which types of imagery might be in future paintings. So yay for having months and months and months, years worth of content already in the planning. But that doesn't answer why the clock, because the clock was not in the sketchbook. Go to video number 2, in which I painted a tree, and I did it in wash and ink. And thank you to all of you who shared there as well. And the people who told me your process for wash and ink. Do you do the watercolor first or the ink first? That was interesting to hear. I love learning from you as well. But in that video, I had a lot of comments from people that said, where have you been? Why have you not been on YouTube all this time? You're a great teacher. I'm an OG YouTuber. I've been on this platform since 2007. I have 1,800 plus videos, 1,800 or so on my big channel, which is what I guess I'll call it, and dozens and dozens more on other channels that I've done guest videos for. So there's a lot of me out there. You just haven't been introduced to me. So nice to meet you. On my OG channel, which is linked in the doobly-doo, go to the homepage and just scroll down on the homepage and you will see a playlist. It's a playlist of playlists for watercolor. And so you can just watch watercolor to your heart's content. Just know that a lot of that was done a very long time ago. Some of that was done more recently, but a lot of it is on the older side. I'm creating this channel, Sandy Paints, as well as Sandy Draws, to just kind of refresh things a bit. And I am so excited that so many people jumped in right here at the beginning. So you are at the ground level, and I'm excited you're here. Why does that play into why I chose a clock? How does that make sense? Well, if I have all these new people, I was thinking about it and realized new people aren't going to have any idea what my favorite supplies are. And I know you're going to have those questions. What was that brush? What paper was that painted on? And while I do have supply lists in each video, I thought it might be helpful to do what I was looking for when I first met an artist or started doing watercolor back in 2015, which was I was looking for supply videos. What brushes do they use? What paper do they use and why? And what paints do they use? What colors do you need? All that stuff that you're looking for when you're starting, I want to address that. So I'm going to have a series in the next coming weeks. We're going to talk about all of that. But a lot of that is addressed to me when I was in 2015 trying to learn to watercolor. I was looking for that information. But I also want to share some videos about other things that I didn't know that I needed to know. And that's where today's video comes in, because subject matter is key to helping you learn. I wanted to learn everything at once. I figured since I already knew how to draw and I could use all these other mediums, if I already knew how to draw, then I can just jump right in, right? I can jump in and make a painting that has the trees and the mountain and the stream running through the field of flowers and the deer just drinking out of the stream and, like a butterfly flying by too. Why not? And in watercolor, that's not as easy as it might be in pencils or markers or something else. Watercolor is a different beast entirely. And what I found is that my paintings got better as I learned how to paint each of those individual things, because then I could start to think about how I fit them together. But I started out trying to do all of them at once. I started out taking really great workshops from amazing artists. And I'll link you to a whole bunch of them, to their Instagrams in the description down below. But like Alvaro Castanet, who is just a hoot. He's a saucy kind of fella and an amazing painter. But he would paint these things where there's like people and cars and buildings. And it was powerful and amazing. And I couldn't even think past one thing before he was on to another, because I was so new. And I studied under Tom Schaller, who does cityscapes and all sorts of things as well, subject matter, but he has so much light that he captures. And I didn't know enough when I was taking classes from him to ask more about, like, how do you capture that light? There were things like that I needed to know that I didn't know that I needed to know. And advice to 2015 me would be to simplify my own subject matter and learn how to master those techniques in a simpler fashion rather than trying to do them with everything all at once. So a bunch of the paintings that I'm going to be sharing here with you at the beginning of the channel at the minimum is going to be simpler subjects that we can explore specific techniques on. In this painting, there's some bokeh in the windows. We'll talk about how to do that. We'll be talking about how to mix colors, a lot of different things that are going to happen in this painting that will bear on all the other things that you end up painting in the future. So that's my goal for this kind of kickoff to the channel. In this particular photograph that I selected, I loved a few things about it. One is that the perspective is really limited. So not only is the subject matter limited, it's a window and a clock, but the perspective on the window is just flat. It is absolute rectangles. And if you wanted to, if you're a real beginner and you want to try this, just take out the verticals in the windows altogether and just make it one big flood for that background out the window and keep it really simple. I'm even going to simplify my painting not to include the screen version, because there's one window that has a screen in it, one window that does not. We're just going to treat them both like they just have glass, and we're going to keep that easy. I've simplified even the amount of wood, the little wood stripes that are in all the construction, simplifying that. You could take most of that out and make that background wash easier. But what I am going to talk about, which is going to be really helpful for those who are intermediate and advanced especially, is creating a wash that joins all of the elements. One of the things that's been a problem for me over the years is kissed edges. And I thought I'd talk about that here before you see it in the painting, so you'll be prepared for that, because often things come up in a painting and you're like, wait. So let's talk about that first. A kissed edge is when you're painting a flood of color that comes up to here, and you're painting the other flood of color that comes up to here. And it's impossible to make those two meet perfectly. You'll end up with a little crisscross, and it won't be an even crisscross either, because our hands don't paint that way. And it'll be a crisscross, and you'll get a hard edge. And the way that I am going to be painting this background all the way through the clock, so that the whole thing is joined together, is going to help eliminate some of those kissed edges that we could get. we're doing a black clock here. Fortunately, it's another reason why this is a good photo to use, because we're getting real darks in there. But if it was a red clock or a yellow clock, you would end up with some kissed edges because you have the blue gray of the background coming right up to the edges of the clock. And how do you deal with that? I'm sure I will mention kissed edges many times in the future because it drives me absolutely batty. It's one of the things that I'm learning to overcome in my own painting. So I will stop talking now and turn you over to the painting itself. The painting is going to start with the first pass, the first wash, sometimes called the underpainting, but it's basically the lightest colors in the painting because everything else can just get darker and darker over it. I'm going to join not only the window portions, but I'm going to join the clock to it. And I'll explain why as we go. But I'm going to mix up some French ultramarine with transparent red oxide, which is going to make a blue-gray color. I can push it to more of a warm gray color by adding more brown, but I want it to be more of a blue-gray. But you might wonder, some of you might know that Paynes Blue Gray is in my palette. Why am I not using that? Look at the difference in the colors. There's some life that I can get when I mix a blue with a brown because I can be in control of how much blue is in it. Whereas with Paynes Blue Gray, I'm kind of stuck with the color that's there because it's just one color. So that's kind of why I like having some mixes. We are going to use the Paynes Blue Gray during this painting though. So in order to start this, I'm using my Mottler flat brush. And this one I love because I can put down these nice, simple wash areas. And I'm using a big flat brush, so I'm not going to be able to be fussy with it. Kind of forces me to be just really clean and simple with it, because otherwise I do death by 1,000 brushstrokes. There's a small white highlight in between those two sections that I just painted. But then also one of the things that we want to do is not create kissed edges. And so here I've stopped it at the clock. And that's going to create kissed edges potentially when I do some other painting with this. So I'm going to paint into the clock and I'm going to let those colors run together because I'm using the same colors. So if they bleed into each other, it's not going to hurt anything. And when I do it with the same mix, with the same moisture level, I haven't done anything special that's going to make one color bleed into the other. Because if you use one that's wetter than the other, the wetter one will travel into the drier one and start making blooms and blossoms. If you do it all at the same time, then you just get this nice wash across all of it. Now we're getting a little variance in color simply because I was a dummy and did rinse my brush, but trying to stay with the whole idea of using that one puddle. Now, I am notorious for never mixing enough paint for the entire thing, so we are going to get some color shifts. However, the places we're going to get color shifts are not important ones, but I want to have this overall color underneath. So if there's anywhere that I want to have a light gray in the clock, I will already have it there. And when I add my darks to it, I can leave some of those light grays showing through the darkness. So this also helps because I can paint in some of the areas around. There's all these little highlights here and there on this clock. And when you start getting into big, dark brushstrokes and white paper, it can get really scary because you're like, oh my gosh, is this the right place? And did I put too much pigment down? And oh my goodness, what happens if I over splooged with my brush and covered up one of the areas I wanted to highlight? Well, when you're doing it with a light color like this, it doesn't matter all that much because a light color will read when it's right within a bunch of darks. It will read like a white. So even if you mess something up at this stage, it's fixable. Whereas if you wait until you're only working with the darkest values, when you're really painting in the blacks that are in this black clock, you're going to not be able to fix things as easily. Now you can fix them with gouache, but gouache doesn't always bring it back to full white. Sometimes, things will bleed through and that sort of thing because gouache is a water-based pigment, so it can lift things. So I'm using a lighter wash of this light blue, and I've added just plenty of water to it so it will be really light. It doesn't matter if it starts bleeding into the more grayish color that is in there for the rest of the clock. That's all going to get covered. But if I paint this wash at the same time, then all of it's going to be there together, and I can add in other details on top of it, but at least I've got this one value across everything, and I can work out all of those places where I'm leaving the white highlights. Now, there's a lot of people who will say, Sandy, you're crazy. You should just use masking fluid. But if you've ever tried to paint with masking fluid, it's not easy to control. I find it very difficult to get any kind of a shape that looks natural. I can do that better with a brush, painting around those shapes. So that's why I don't use masking fluid unless it's a very, very specific kind of circumstance. So here my my bells turned a little bluer. Every time I mix up colors when I'm doing this kind of thing, I do get a slightly different color because I'm mixing again. It's nearly impossible to get the same mix all the time, but at least if I'm using the same blue and brown that I'm mixing, then I'm at least going to have some colors that are related to each other. So it's all going to feel like it's part of the same thing. And when we start adding the Paynes Blue Gray on top of this, we're going to have this nice blue underneath, and that's going to give the blacks in the clock a little more life than just working with the Paynes Blue Gray itself. So this is a place where I can take a deep breath because I don't have any areas that are wet that need to be right next to another wet area except that bell. So I decided I'm going to leave that for the time being because I want to show you what I mean by kissed edge. On my big channel, if you didn't know, I did have a big channel. I still do have a big channel. I guess I didn't delete it, but there's like 1,800 videos there. A bunch of them are watercolor. And in a bunch of them, I do talk about kissed edges because a kissed edge is where you're painting a wash that's going to touch another wash and they're going to overlap just slightly. And it's like nearly impossible to make your brush really go around them so that they don't overlap and that sort of thing. So if you're able to plan your painting well and just figure out, okay, what's touching what and what can I paint next to it that's not going to cause me problems, then you're going to be a lot better off when you're doing the actual painting. So planning your painting is something that takes a long time to get used to, but once you start doing it, it makes a huge difference. So I painted that right section that goes all the way up between the windows. There's a white highlight on the middle window or that middle window section. And then I'm just painting these in. Now, the place right where that bell is, where I tried to paint around it with this color, I have a kissed edge there. If that were the finished color, if there were nothing else that were going to go over top of it, then I would have that kissed edge forever in my painting because you, like I said, you can't really physically paint the two of them, butt them up completely next to each other without having either a gap or an overlap. Meeting them perfectly is just not possible. So that is basically the first wash, the first pass, and I'm wiping up any paint that's sitting on the edges of the tape. You'll see me do that throughout the painting because if that water pushes back into the paint, I could create a bloom there by some accident. And I'm going to be painting some details, and it's always kind of a fine line for me whether this is the second wash or details on the first wash. So I'm going to still be considering this the first wash. I could have painted these without drying the rest, but the rest is dry at this point. And I wanted to just put in these small lines. These are going to be the place where the green is going to come in the window. There's like a little ledge around them, a little lip where the color gets darker. And if I put it over top of this color that's here, this blue gray color, then it's going to just make for a darker green. You'll see how that works out when we when we paint the windows in. So I'm get everything dry, and I think then we'll call it the second pass. This is going to include some details and some extra areas of washes that weren't really crucial to have in the first pass. So having them in the second pass will be fine. So I'm going to use that same combination of the blue and the brown to add in some shadows underneath of the hands and the clock. So all three of them. The big ones always get all the attention, so don't forget the second hand, because that one will just make it feel like it's ticking, because it's just one more small detail. And then I'm going to put in a few shadows, or I guess reflections. There's something going on in the glass in the photo, and I decided to really simplify it. I'm just going to put a few marks down here just so there's something in the glass, as opposed to trying to put in a ton of detail. And all of this has been simplified, by the way. The clock has been simplified. There's some areas that I just did not include. And this background as well, I kind of moved things over, shrunk up some of the space in between the two windows because I want to make nice big green ones. And I was thinking carefully about how many passes to go over to darken spots like this. So this is a second coat for this darker area at the bottom. I could have made it darker in the first place, but I just thought I'd talk about it since we're talking about, in general, trying not to have kissed edges. Here, I wanted to make that go over into the clock. I didn't feel like painting the whole clock again for it to go through perfectly. So I just let the paint travel in there. It's going to be really dark, but I wanted a scumbly edge. I didn't want a line edge, because you can end up fighting a line underneath in the underneath wash. So if you can soften it out, that usually helps. But I'm trying with these rectangular sections of the window. I tried to simplify them from what's in the reference just to make it easier to paint, because there are different areas where boards join and stuff that just seemed like they were going to get really confusing. So I'm painting this with a little darker value at the bottom, because there's darker value in this window at the bottom side, and then just kind of slowly working on which other sections are going to need darkened. On this right-hand side, the whole window, that whole bottom section, is darker than the left-hand side. Not knowing what else is in the photograph, what other window shapes are out there, where the sun is coming in from. In addition to that, those windows that we see, there might be a window facing that clock that's causing the clock to cast a shadow back there. I have no idea. But I thought I'll make it a little bit darker, which also makes that white line, that white horizontal line, show up a little better. And then I can start using maybe a little more dark value in one stripe of the border here on the window, leaving that white so that when we get the glass painted in with all the greens, we'll have a nice crisp white line with just a little darker, slightly darker gray in that section. And then I'm going to switch to the bigger brush, because I've got this big chunk of window and I wanted to paint another coat on it, but stop short on the left-hand side because I want to have just a couple little window details. Now, if you're new to doing this kind of thing and you want to simplify it even more, you can make that whole background just a simple single window shape and just leave a white outline in between the window frame and the windows, the contents that are going to be green. And you could make it that simple, but I thought I'd get a little crazy because it seemed like it would be kind of fun to get a little bit crazy on these, but they're still simpler than the ones in the photo because the windows didn't line up architecturally. I would love to know what was going on in this building, how the different window panels came together, because they don't make any sense, their heights and that sort of thing. So sometimes you just see that. It's one reason why I prefer to take my own references if I'm going to, but trying to find things that you can find on the internet. So using places like Unsplash are great resources that I can share with you so you can go find the same photos. And the reference for this one is, of course, in the doobly-doo, which is the description below the video. Now, this shadow behind the clock is much more blue. So here I could push my puddle and make sure it's more blue. If I were using the Paynes Blue Gray, everything would be the same amount of blue. But I can drop in some of the Paynes Blue Gray to make the shadow darker. The shadow underneath an object is generally darker right underneath the object, and then it gets lighter and lighter as it moves outward because the light kind of curls around different objects, reflects on other things in the room, so that shadow will just get lighter and lighter as it moves away from the clock. And I joined it with the clock there, that bottom portion, and just let the brush kind of pull some water out so that I don't end up with a really hard, sharp, weird edge that I'll have to fight later. So on the third pass, which you could still call the second pass, because most of my paintings, I kind of consider them to be 3 passes. If I can get it done in 3 goes across the whole thing, then I do. And these greens, one of the reasons I chose this image to teach is because these greens don't really touch much of anything else. They're just independent. They're in the windows. You're not going to have to worry about where they touch and all that kind of thing because there's that nice white border around each of them for the highlights coming in from the sunshine hitting that window frame. So I'm going to start with some water in here. And of course, my water's dirty, so you're getting a little color in there. But I'm just going to paint that inner portion over top of where I had already had that last gray line. So that last gray line is going to be the dark area in this window. I threw in some Hansa yellow light and some Sap Green together in that puddle. And I mean, you can use any kind of greens you want. If you make more yellows, it'll feel more like, morning because it's going to be really bright and sunny. If you wanted it to be more of a snowy day, you could put more blues out there and change that. Kind of depends on if you're going to do it at nighttime, then maybe I guess you could paint it like it's dark outside. But I'm just doing a bunch of different greens and I'm letting them just kind of mix on their own as much as I possibly can so that I don't feel like I'm forcing anything. I'm not trying to paint shapes that are trees necessarily, but I wanted that edge to be darker. So I thought, well, what if I mix a really thick Paynes Blue Gray with Sap Green and then just tap it in that edge that goes up and down? And I tapped it in just some areas because I wasn't really sure whether or not this was going to work and wanted to see how it was going to move. And there's no guarantee ever how watercolor is going to move. So sometimes I do just try things just to see what happens. I use the small brush to kind of pull that line all the way along the window. But then I wanted to see kind of what is that going to do? Can I make it move along a little bit by tilting the board? Which is why it's important to put everything on a board so you can spin it around upside down, get your hand close to the area you want to work, as well as tilt it if you need to see if you can get some paint to move. And I want to kind of keep an eye on it to see what's going to happen, whether or not there's anything else that I need to fuss around with. Do I want to add more color? It does look like there's a column of splotches. So I am going to kind of try to break some of that up later. But I'm very aware of how wet it is at any given point. So I'm going to fill this section now that I've practiced on the first one. So I deliberately designed this composition so that there would be a small section to practice on. So it's, one of the adaptations that I made. And you always want to think about that, especially if you're not sure what you're painting, how you would paint it. Then create yourself, if you can, a couple of different sections. And they would be sections that have a stop and a start. So this is not a window that goes all the way across that I'm just going to paint the first section of. I wanted to have them divided by the structure of the window so that I could kind of see how it worked in one section, and they have those white outlines around them. So that means I'm not going to be fussing around with anything other than the shape that is that makes up that window. So I've got more of the sap green with the Hansa yellow light, making sure I get all of this all the way over to the edge of the window. And on that left side, I didn't put that gray line. You might have noticed that, might not have, but I don't see that gray line in the photograph, so I didn't include it. Now, I probably could have, I suppose, but one of the reasons that we don't see it is because of the angle of the perspective. So we're not actually seeing that side of the window, whereas on the other ones, we are seeing it. And I know that a lot of people will just totally change all kinds of massive elements in photos for all different kinds of reasons, but I try not to change them unless I really know what I'm doing. If I truly know what the perspective should be, even if it's not what I see, yes, I can change it, but I try not to when I'm working from a photo reference because I want to try to be true to it, even if I'm simplifying. Simplifying is taking things out, but adding things in comes with experience. And I know a lot of artists think, well, I should be able to just paint things out of my head. Well, you should be able to paint things out of your head once you have enough experience to know how to paint those things. And a lot of us, I speak from experience. I have done this. I tried painting things before I knew what I was doing. And then when I started trying to adapt photo references and I wanted to add, a figure, I wanted to add an animal to a scene, I wanted to add something to it, I would get stuck because the perspective or lighting on the thing that was in my head was not matching what was in the rest of the image. I posted a video, a couple of weeks ago on that other channel that I had mentioned. And in that video, I asked people if they had ideas for improving the painting. And I found a surprising number of people who wanted to take out entire giant elements of the painting. It was a landscape. And they wanted to take out the trees and put a mountain there instead. Now, if you were to do something like that, if you were to take this photo, by the way, I'm going to start working on that other section up there. It's still wet, so I can add some more color to it. It just looked too rhythmic and blotchy, so I wanted to break it up a little bit. But if you were to decide you want to adapt this and add in a neighborhood or something, and you don't really have a lot of experience painting a neighborhood, then you might be in a lot of trouble because what is that neighborhood going to look like outside this particular window? How is that going to work out for you? And making that kind of a big decision is something you can do as an advanced painter, but it's one that I necessarily wouldn't always do. And if I did, I would go find a really good reference for it and make sure that the lighting and perspective matched, because you can create all kinds of trouble for yourself. So the kinds of things that I was asking people about for their ideas for improving that particular painting that I asked about were more of where could I have simplified things? Is there a way that I could have painted a certain area, take out, a couple of these bushes here or there to make it a cleaner, simpler kind of painting? So I just thought I would address that since I saw it as an overarching thing. A bunch of people did leave those kinds of comments, and I don't want to leave that unsaid for those who are interested in adapting from photographs. And especially ones like this where I have no idea what's going on beyond what I can see in the photo. So there's limited things that I can add to it, but I can definitely delete things that are kind of in the way or simplify them, like in the Windows surroundings, the boards that make it up. And as long as it's something that makes sense, then I'm all good. So I just sprayed some water on there. I just wanted to get that paint moving again. And lot of times, as long as it's at least good and damp, then a spritz of water might be about all you need in order to get the paint kind of moving around on the paper. And don't worry about trying to make a background like this, a bokeh background, trying to make it super consistent, because trees aren't going to be consistent. There's going to be a clump of trees that are in the sunshine, another clump that are in the shadows. And in the photograph, you can kind of see at the top of it, there's all kinds of funky, funky shapes and that sort of thing. So gonna, kind of let this dry. And, if you end up with some areas that are still not quite right, you can spritz it again, add some more paint to it, that kind of thing. But as I'm drying it, I'm going to be moving the board itself, because I started realizing there's like some puddles that were forming. And so I'm going to move it back and forth so I don't create more blooms. But you can see I just kind of got a bloom to go away by tilting it one way and then tilting it the other, and then trying to zap it while it's in between, so I don't end up with even more stuff kind of becoming a problem. But this will all lighten. So just remember that every time you start watercoloring, um, the color definitely got lighter for me here. There was a little place where my brush went out of the lines. And what do you do with that when it's supposed to be white? I don't worry about it a lot, but in a place like this where it's supposed to be a white line, put a piece of tape down and then use a very clean baby wipe and just do a little lifting, just a little scrub-a-dub, and it will pill up. So don't do it in a really big area. And if you're working on something where it's an important area, be extra careful about that, because you could do all kinds of crazy things to it and be in all kinds of trouble. Before I move on to the next pass, I'm going to eliminate some of the pencil lines. Now, some of the pencil lines that are underneath the wash are actually erasable still, because they're under such thin paint that sometimes you can lift that. Just be careful, because you can actually erase watercolor. So don't use like a really heavy, scrubby kind of plastic eraser unless you want to potentially get rid of some of your watercolor. But you can go over it and kind of really lighten some pencil lines. Generally, I like having pencil lines, at least some of them, showing the process. It shows that this was handmade. It shows that this was not AI. So even though some people freak out and they think, gee whiz, this is gonna make my painting look terrible, that you can see my pencil lines, nobody has the expectation that you have painted an entire scene, an entire painting, without having drawn it first. And, I'm a big proponent of drawing, and learning to draw better is going to make you a better painter. I have a second new channel, and it's called, believe it or not, Sandy Draws, to go with Sandy Paints. And if you would like to learn more about drawing, I'm going to be talking about a lot of that in the coming months and years on that channel. And just know that on that channel, I'm not focusing on things just for people who only want to draw. I'm focusing on things you might need in order to paint. Sometimes we'll be learning to draw it on that channel, and then we'll come here and paint it on a different day. So I might pair some of those up. I have some ideas for doing that. So I'm done with the green. I've touched up the border line for the windows, and I'm just cleaning off the palette to get started on the next section, because I don't want to accidentally get any green anywhere. So in the fourth pass, we're going to paint the subject. It doesn't mean that the fourth pass is always where the subject is painted. There are plenty of times when the subject gets more coats of paint sooner, kind of thing. But in this particular case, I'm saving that for last, because now I've got a good idea of what my windows look like, and I can start working through that. So I'm going to be painting it in primarily the Paynes Blue Gray. I'll be adding in a little bit of other colors as we go, just to add some life to it, because anything that's just kind of a big black shape just looks like a big black shape. And this one, this clock has so many different shapes and values in it. I want to make sure I include those and highlight them because there's really not much else. There's like the window, and that's it. The whole focus of this painting is on this particular clock. So I want to make it look fun. And just painting all of these shapes in solid dark value is going to be very boring. So I've got my paint mixed up. It's not super thick, but it's going to be a little more on the watery side so that the paint can move. And if your paint's not moving, then just add a little bit of water to it. So I'm going to add water directly onto the paper here and let those edges bleed together. And that's going to give me some different dimension. I can add in some darker paint around the corners so that I get that value difference between all those shapes. And now I can dry that section. And I'm not worried about kissed edges on these things because there's all these sharp highlights for where all the shine is at. So I'm going to just work on it one section at a time. So next up is adding in some real darks. And you can see I've changed the lighting on the photograph. And you can do this in your phone, just kind of play with the adjustments. And you can see darks within darks. You can see where the real dark black like shadows are. And you can see also some color or some lighter values that are in certain shapes. So there might be a dot of something or a square of something, and it might be a reflection from something right there. It might be the reflection of the other bell. It might be from across the room. We don't know. But those are the things that are going to make it look shiny. So if you can see any of them, you want to include them. And on the handle of this thing, the light is coming from the left and the shadows are on the right. So on that left side where it curves down to the left, and on the top, it's going to be on either the right side or the bottom side. It's on the opposite side from the sun. But when it flips around, it gets thinner as it moves across this top. And then when it moves down the other side, the shadow is going to be on the right side. So it's still on the right side, just like it's on the right side of the left side, but it's not all going to be on the inside. It's just going to change sides, or I guess change something. It's just not identical. So don't put all the shadows on the inside. But on the handle, I'm not really using a whole lot of different values, except for on this corner. I wanted to have just a little bit of light come through, and there will be a little bit of light on the other side of the handle because both of them kind of curl upward. They have a little I guess striations or something. I'm not really sure. Some construction thing in that. But the area around here, you can see where I'm putting these shadows. You can expand that into the greens and just cover up some of the greens with that dark. It'll give you the opportunity to clean up any areas that maybe weren't painted perfectly. If there was some wobbles in the greens, those can be fixed with the darkest color. So always thinking about that will remind you that the darkest color is going to go on last because that's what's going to fix things. So looking at the various highlight shapes here, there's that one highlight on the front of that bell, and then it's going to get dark all the way around the bottom. Now I have that blue color underneath that's going to act as the shadow across the whole thing, or actually it's more of a reflection, that light blue at the top. So I want to try to leave some of that blue showing on the top of the bell and not just cover it all up. It's one of the things about having that beautiful underpainting. It leaves you the option to paint just shadow shapes on top. And you can use water to do that, water to soften it out. You can add in darker values where you see a shadow. So there might be a shadow or a reflection on the bell from any old thing. And then look for other interesting shapes. Like the place where this curls down at the outside edge is just kind of cool. And anything that's going to give it a little more life that that just looks interesting. That's what I'm looking for when I'm looking at the reference, because I want to see what's going to make it feel shiny. What are those little highlight details that are going to do that? So there's a place where the bell attaches to the clock itself, that sort of thing. And now I'm going to move over to the rest of the clock. Decided I would get rid of a little more lines that it didn't quite erase very much and start to paint these. Now the outside edge of the clock on that left is going to be a white highlight. So we're not going to outline it because, you don't outline highlights. When you see the white edge of something, you don't see a line around the white edge. So we want to leave that and then start looking on the interior of this shape that goes around the clock, the whole edge. And are there places where it can get lighter? So there are some places where you can see a little bit of lighter value and move around the whole clock looking for those changes in the photograph. You're going to have plenty of it that's going to be really dark. You'll have some midtones, maybe a couple of areas where it's light, and then look for any spots that have just a little break in it. The edge of this clock is going to follow the same kind of principle that we talked about on the handle, that there's going to come a point at the bottom where everything's going to flip, because this left side has all the highlight on the left and the shadow on the right. But when we get to the opposite side, it's going to be the same, but it's not all pointing to the inside. So the highlights are always going to point toward the sun. And then when we get down to the bottom, we're going to have a switch where the highlight moves to the inside, where on the left side, it's on the outside. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. But every time that happens, I sort of struggle to figure out how to explain it. But the biggest thing to pay attention to is not like, okay, Sandy said to look at the shadows on this side and the highlights on that. Look for what you see, because what you see is going to tell you what it should be. I only tell you these things as I'm teaching because I want you to be, I guess, a little more scientifically aware of what to look for, as opposed to making it a law of the universe. Because there might be some time when you're painting something that doesn't follow those rules in general, because there's something else, there's another light source somewhere that's causing things to act differently. So just memorizing rules and saying when the light comes from here, the shadow's always there, doesn't really get you anywhere, because science follows science. It doesn't follow our art rules. But teaching you, at least in general, what happens in a normal circumstance helps you to make some educated guesses. But your better bet is to start to really learn to see. And how do you learn to see? You start looking really in detail at your photos that you're working with. And you look at things in real life and you paint from real life, if at all possible. I mean, this little clock could be painted right here in my studio. It doesn't have to be painted from this photo from Unsplash. It's, just a clock by a window. You can set up your own clock by a window and paint it up any old way that you would like, with whatever lighting you set up, depending on where the sunshine is at. Are there any other elements that are in your window that you want to include? Set up your own still life. A little clock like this is just a great little exercise in painting a normal thing, a normal object in your house that is not, it's not something that's going to end up in the Louvre. But boy, does it teach you a lot about painting and shadows and shapes and those sorts of things. And it gives you lots of practice on a simple subject in coming up with what is the plan? What is the plan of attack? So here, my plan of attack is, again, to start adding in these darks, leaving some light areas. But in this case, instead of doing a wash and then a darker wash and then a lighter wash and then blah, 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 here I'm going to let a lot of this mush together. So that was my plan, was to put in my darkest darks with very thick paint, because that means that paint will stay a little bit better in place. And then use some kind of very wet, juicy washes in between them. And you can see there's a line across and then there's a highlight down below it. I saw that by looking at the photo and brightening it so that I could then get a good idea of what it looks like if I weren't just thinking of it as a black object. I saw more blue highlights toward the top. I don't know what's going on in the room, that there's some bluer highlights. This is a little too bright. I can fix that. But I mixed some very thick Paynes Blue Gray to start putting in for the ones that I know are very dark. That reflection of the bell is going to be very, very dark. So that's going to be nice and thick, so it's going to stay in place. And then I'm going to use a smaller brush and start drawing in. Yes, I said drawing. You need to draw. I'm drawing in some of the other shapes. There are definite shapes inside of these shadows. And even though all this paint is very wet, if I can put the paint in here nice and thick, then it's not going to bleed out into everything. But if your paint is really puddly on the paper, don't try that, because anything will kind of bleed out if it's already super soppy wet. But mine's not super soppy wet. So the only way to know, like, when is it too wet and too dry, is to try it. Just keep painting, and at some point you'll find, something was too wet and shouldn't have been, and you'll know that for next time. So practice is your best bet for learning that, because there's no rules I can give. But as I was, kind of getting further into this, I was putting in a little bit more darks, but I also started realizing that I was going to need to wash over some of this color, because now the clock was losing its blackness and starting to feel like it was a striped clock, or that there were some really super distinct, very bright shapes casting reflections on it. And that's not the case. So before I do the next phase, I wanted to get these really nice darks in there, because I want the shapes to stay, even though I'm going to be adding some stuff that's going to kind of dull everything down a little bit and bring it all together. But I want it to dry with those shapes in it. But I also wanted to work on the hands of the clock. So I figured I'd do that in this pass before doing the final touches in the final pass, which I guess the next pass could be still, this could still be 3 passes. I'm breaking it into more than I need to, but that's just how it goes. So the hands on the clock are lighter on the left and darker on the right, as I was kind of looking at it. And so I'm going to drop in some darker pigment on the right-hand side, lighter on the left. It's a very subtle thing, but when you're working with anything that's glass, it's going to distort things that are underneath of it. So that's probably what's happening with those clock hands. Now, drying this well before a wash like this is important if you want the wash to work, because what I'm going to do is flood right over the top of this whole side of the clock. And I want some of those things to remain. I want the details that I've already painted in there in those dark values to stay put. So got all of that good and dry, and I'm going to use a wash that's going to be kind of a middle wash. I'm going to have plenty of water in it, and I'm just going to use my number 8 brush to just paint over the whole thing. And you can kind of see how it pulls everything together. Instead of having all those little tiny detail shapes, it's now one shape for the whole clock, but you can also see those darks within it, which is what I was seeing in the photograph. I was seeing these kind of striations of the clock reflections that are in there. And, I got a little bit of green in there that just happened to be on one of the brushes, a little bit of blue from that wash. and it added more life to the black. So even though if you look at this, you'll say it's a painting of a black alarm clock, it still feels like it's got more life in it because it's got those blues underneath all of it. So I've got some darks painted into the legs on the bottom. Get that all dried up. And the last bit of detail that's going to be added to this, and actually one of the reasons I'm drying this is because of those last details, because my hand was going to end up laying right there as I paint the numbers. Now, some people would get out a pen and do the numbers in pen and ink because it's not particularly easy to do this. I debated whether to get out a number 2 or a number 0 to really make these details small. But details that small when the rest of this painting is so simplified just seemed like too much. And I wanted something where I could change the value of these numbers. And with pen and ink, you're not going to get any value change. You're just going to get those straight up numbers. So I'm okay with my handwriting for these numbers and my brushwork being a little on the loosey-goosey side. That's not an issue for me in this painting because it matches the character of the painting itself. If I were to fix the clock and all kinds of other things with pen and ink, that would be very different because pen and ink would go with that. But in this particular case, it's not particularly going to fit with the character of the painting to suddenly jump to pen and ink at this stage. So decided I would also paint in this. This is probably one of the things that I was regretting once I started it, but once I started, I couldn't really stop, which is there's lines on the clock face itself that, kind of have little horizontal lines in them as well. And my goodness, was that a pain in the butt for my brush? It was not a small enough brush to really do it justice. But again, I could have done it in pen and ink, or I could have even just left it in pencil. Sometimes I leave details like that in pencil, and this is one of those details I thought might have been better in pencil than with my scrubby brushwork. But it fits the character of the whole painting. It feels like a watercolor, not like a watercolor where I was trying to be perfect, but a watercolor where I was just trying to get the character of the clock itself and the setting that it's in, as opposed to trying for perfection, because who needs that? We have AI if we want all that kind of perfection, and we don't need that in our lives because we have art, we have skills, and we can make things look beautiful just by the work of our very own hands. So putting in the last details, just wanted to darken in the second hand. Sign it, of course. Always sign your work. And then I get to remove the tape, which is always the most fun part. Well, it's not the most fun part if the color of the background has slipped under your tape. It happens to me because I don't take the time to really smush the tape down well. So, use a fingernail to really get it down into the crevices, especially if you're going to be working with really dark backgrounds of some kind. Really helps to make sure that you don't get any of that color escaping down below. But this one came out perfectly with the tape. So yay for all of that. And we have another painting in the books. I would love to hear what you think about it in the comments. So thank you for watching, for sitting through this very long video. God bless you for doing so. I will see you on Saturday with another in the series, talking to 2015 Sandy about one of these many topics that I wish she had known about. I'll see you then. Bye.